Hello. I'm going to read you the first few pages of this novel, The Man Who Saw Everything by Deborah Levy. It's the novella, it's a short novel that we're going to discuss with the Novella Reading Club next Monday, the 19th of July. It's a really beautiful novel. I'm sure you will agree as soon as you hear the first few pages that I'm going to read for you now. Right. The Man Who Saw Everything by Deborah Levy. It's like this, Saul Adler. When I was 23, I loved the way you touched me. But when the afternoon slipped in and you slipped out of me, you were already looking for someone else. No, it's like this, Jennifer Moreau. I loved you every night and every day, but you were scared of my love, and I was scared of my love too. No, she said, I was scared of your envy, which was bigger than your love. Attention, Saul Adler. Attention. Look to the left and to the right, cross the road and get to the other side. 1. Abbey Road, London, September 1988. I was thinking about how Jennifer Moreau had told me I was never to describe her beauty, not to her or to anyone else. When I asked her why I was silenced in this way, she said, because you only have old words to describe me. This was on my mind when I stepped onto the zebra crossing with its black and white stripes at which all vehicles must stop to allow pedestrians to cross the road. A car was coming towards me, but it did not stop. I had to jump backwards and fell on my hip, using my hands to protect myself from the fall. The car stalled and a man rolled down the window. He was in his 60s, silver hair, dark eyes, thin lips. He asked if I was okay. When I did not answer, he stepped out of his car. I apologize, he said. You walked onto the crossing and I slowed down, preparing to stop, but then you changed your mind and walked back to the curb. His eyelids were quivering at the corners. And then, without warning, you lurched forward onto the crossing. I smiled at his careful reconstruction of history, blatantly told in his favour. He furtively glanced at his car to check if it had been damaged. The wing mirror had been shattered. His thin lips parted and he sighed sorrowfully, muttering something about how he had ordered the mirror from Milan. I had been up all night writing a lecture on the psychology of male tyrants, and I'd made a start with the way Stalin flirted with women by flicking bread at them across the dinner table. My notes, about 5 sheets of paper, had fallen out of my leather sling bag, and embarrassingly so had a packet of condoms. I started to pick them up. A small, flat, rectangular object was lying in the road. I noticed the driver was looking at my knuckles as I handed him the object, which felt warm and seemed to be vibrating in my palm. It was not mine, so I assumed it was his. Blood dripped through my fingers. My palms were grazed and there was a cut on the knuckle of my left hand. I sucked it while he watched me, clearly distressed. Do you need a lift somewhere? I'm okay. He offered to take me to a pharmacy to clean up the wound, as he put it. When I shook my head, he reached out his hand and touched my hair, which was strangely comforting. He asked for my name. Saul Adler. Look, it's just a small graze. I have thin skin. I always bleed a lot. It's nothing. He was holding his left arm in a strange way, cradling it with his right arm. I picked up the condoms and shoved them into my jacket pocket. A wind was up. The leaves that had been swept into small piles under the trees were blowing across the road. The driver told me the traffic had been diverted because there was a demonstration that day in London, and he'd wondered if Abbey Road was closed off. The detour was not signposted clearly. He did not understand why he'd become confused, because he often came this way to watch the cricket at Lord's nearby. While he spoke, he gazed at the rectangular object in his hand. The object was speaking. There was definitely a voice inside it, a man's voice, and he was saying something angry and insulting. We both pretended not to hear his words. "Fuck off, I hate you, don't come home." "How old are you, Saul? Can you tell me where you live?" I think the near collision had really scared the driver. When I told him I was 28, he didn't believe me and asked for my age again. He was so posh, he pronounced my name as if a pebble had been inserted between the roof of his mouth and his lower lip. His silver hair was slicked back with a product that made it shine. I, in turn, asked for his name. "Wolfgang," he said very quickly, as if he did not want me to remember it. "Like Mozart," I said. And then, rather like a child showing his father where he'd been hurt after falling off a swing, I pointed to the cut on my knuckle and kept repeating that I was okay. His concerned tone was starting to make me tearful. I wanted him to drive off and leave me alone. Perhaps the tears were to do with my father's recent death, though my father was not as groomed or as gentle as shiny, silver-haired Wolfgang. To hasten his departure, I explained that my girlfriend was about to arrive any minute now, so he didn't have to hang around. In fact, she was going to take a photograph of me stepping onto the zebra crossing in the style of the photograph of the Beatles album. "Which album is that, Saul?" "It's called Abbey Road. Everyone knows that. Where have you been, Wolfgang?" He laughed, but he looked sad. Perhaps it was because of the insulting words that had been spoken from inside the vibrating object in his hand. "And how old is your girlfriend?" 23. Actually, Abbey Road was the last album the Beatles recorded together at the EMI studios, which are just over there. I pointed to a large white house on the other side of the road. "Of course I know that," he said sadly. "It's nearly as famous as Buckingham Palace." He walked back to his car, murmuring, "Take care, Saul. You're lucky to have such a young girlfriend. By the way, what do you do?" His comments and questions were starting to irritate me. Also, the way he sighed as if he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders of his beige cashmere coat. I decided not to reveal that I was a historian and that my subject was communist Eastern Europe. It was a relief to hear the animal growl of his engine revving as I stepped back on the pavement. Considering it was he who had nearly run me over, perhaps it was he who should take care. I waved to him, but he did not wave back. As for my young girlfriend, I was only 5 years older than Jennifer, so what was he going on about? And why did he want to know her age? Or what I do? Never mind. I was looking at the notes in my hand, which was still bleeding, in which I had transcribed how Stalin's father had been an alcoholic and was abusive to his family. Stalin's mother had enrolled her son Joseph into a Greek Orthodox priesthood school to protect him from his father's rage after he had tried to strangle her. I could not easily read my own writing, but I had underlined something about how Stalin would go on to punish people for their unconscious sins as well as their conscious sins, such as thought crimes against the party. My left hip began to ache. "Take care, Saul." "Thanks for the advice, Wolfgang." Back to my notes, which were now smudged with blood from my knuckle. Joseph Stalin, I had written this late at night, was always pleased to punish someone. He even bullied his own son with such cruelty that he attempted to shoot himself. His wife also shot herself more successfully than her son, who, unlike his mother, lived to be bullied again and again by his father. My own late father was not exactly a bully. He left that task to my brother, Matthew, who was always up for a bit of cruelty. Like Stalin, Matthew went after his own family, or made sure he made their lives so miserable they went after themselves. I sat on the wall outside the EMI studios while I waited for Jennifer to arrive. In 3 days, I was travelling to East Germany, the GDR, to research cultural opposition to the rise of fascism in the 1930s at the Humboldt University. Although my German was reasonably fluent, they had assigned me a translator. His name was Walter Müller. I was to stay for 2 weeks in East Berlin with his mother and sister, who had offered me a room in their tenement apartment near the university. Walter Müller was part of the reason I had nearly been run over on the zebra crossing. He had written to say that his sister, whose name was Katrin, but the family called her Luna, was a big Beatles fan. Since the 1970s, albums by both the Beatles and Bob Dylan had been allowed to be released in the GDR, unlike in the 50s and 60s, when pop music was seen by the ruling Socialist Party of Germany as a cultural weapon to corrupt the young. Officials were obliged to study all the lyrics before albums could be released. Yeah. What could that possibly mean? What was it that it was being said yes to? It had been Jennifer's idea to take a photograph of myself crossing the zebra on Abbey Road to give to Luna. The week before, she had asked me to explain the whole concept of the GDR to her, but I had become distracted. We were caramelizing peanuts in the kitchen of her flat at the time, and I was burning the sugar. It was quite a complicated recipe in which we were instructed to add the peanuts to the boiling sugar syrup and then bake them in the oven. Jennifer did not understand how the people of a whole country could be locked up behind a wall and not be allowed to leave. While I was banging on about how Germany came to be ideologically and physically separated into 2 countries divided by a wall, communist in the east, capitalist in the west, and how the communist authorities called the wall the anti-fascist protection rampart, her fingers had slipped under the waistband of my jeans. I was burning the sugar, and Jennifer was not exactly taking notes. We had both lost interest in the German Democratic Republic. I saw her walking towards me, carrying a small aluminium stepladder on her arm. She was wearing the Soviet pilot's cap I had bought her at a flea market on the Portobello Road. I kissed her and told her briefly what had happened. Jennifer was preparing for an exhibition of her photographs at an art school, but had taken the afternoon off to do the photoshoot, as she called it. Some sort of camera was strapped to her leather belt, another hung around her neck. I did not disclose the details of the near crash, but she noticed the cut on my knuckle. "You've got thin skin," she said. I asked her why she was carrying a stepladder. She told me That was how the original photo of the Beatles on the Abbey Road zebra crossing was taken in August 1969 at 11:30 a.m. The photographer, Ian Macmillan, had placed the ladder at the side of the zebra while a policeman was paid to direct the traffic. Macmillan was given 10 minutes to take the photo. But as I was not actually famous in any way, we couldn't ask the police for 5 minutes, so we had to work quickly. I think there's been a diversion and Abbey Road is closed today. As I was speaking, 3 cars sped by, followed by a black taxi for hire, a motorbike, 2 bicycles and a lorry loaded with wooden planks. Yes, Saul, it's definitely closed, she said, fiddling with her camera. I reckon you look more like Mick Ronson than any of the Beatles, even though your hair is black and Mick's is blonde. It was true that my hair, which was shoulder length, had been cut by Jennifer 2 days ago in the style of Bowie's lead guitarist. She was secretly proud of what she had called my rock star looks, and she loved my body more than I loved my body, which made me love her. When the road was clear, she set up the ladder in the same place that Wolfgang was supposed to have stopped his car. As she clambered up and sorted out her camera, she yelled instructions. Put your hands in your jacket pockets. Look down, look straight ahead. Okay, walk now, bigger strides, go. There were 2 cars waiting, but she held up her hand to keep them there as she put a new roll of film into her camera. When the cars started to hoot, she flamboyantly bowed to them from the top of the ladder. 2. To thank Jennifer for her time, I bought 6 oysters from the fishmonger and a bottle of dry white. We spent the next couple of hours in her bed while her 2 flatmates, Sanvi and Claudia, were out. It was a poky, dark basement flat, but they all enjoyed living there and seemed to get along. Claudia was a vegan who was always soaking some sort of seaweed in a bowl of water in the kitchen. When we kissed, fully clothed on the bed, her pilot cap kept falling over her eyes, which really turned me on. Now and again, blue lights flashed in my head, but I didn't tell Jennifer, who was playing with a string of pearls I always wore around my neck. When I finally took off my white trousers, she noticed I had a large bruise on my right thigh and both my knees were grazed and bleeding. Can you tell me what actually happened, Saul? I told her more about how I had nearly been run over just before she arrived and how I was embarrassed about picking up the packet of condoms. She laughed and then slurped an oyster and threw the shell on the floor. We should look for pearls inside those oysters, she said. Maybe we could make you another necklace. She wanted to know why I was so keen to go to East Germany, what with its citizens stuck behind the wall and that Stasi spying on everyone. Perhaps it wasn't a safe place to visit. Why didn't I do my research in West Berlin so that she could visit me and we could go to concerts and drink cheap beer? I'm not sure Jennifer truly believed I was a scholar and not a rock star. Your eyes are so blue, she said, climbing on top of me and sitting astride my hips. It's quite unusual to have intense black hair and even more intense blue eyes. You're much prettier than I am. I want your cock inside me all the time. Everyone is frightened in the GDR, aren't they? I still don't understand how the people of a whole country can be locked up behind a wall and not be allowed to leave. I could smell the sweet ylang-ylang oil she always combed through her hair before she walked into the tiny sauna that had come with the basement flat in Hamilton Terrace. Some nights I would arrive there from work in the evening and listen to her talking with Claudia and Sanvi in the sauna while I marked my students' essays at the kitchen table. When Jennifer finally emerged from the sauna, sometimes an hour later, naked and oiled with her homemade ilang ilang potion, she often tormented me by withholding her affection. Making chamomile tea, buttering a crisp bread, then she pounced. I couldn't have wished for a more ravishing predator to pull me away from an essay in which my worst male student had ended by attributing some of the most famous lines in the world to the wrong author. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a whole world to win. I crossed out Leon Trotsky and wrote Karl Marx. I knew that Jennifer was turned on by my body, but I got the impression, as she guided my fingers to touch her in the places that most thrilled her, that she was not that interested in my mind. She started to tell me how artists like Claude Cahun and Cindy Sherman meant more to her than Stalin and Erich Honecker. No, she said, here, and I could feel her coming. After which she lay by my side as I guided her fingers to the places that most pleased me. While she explained that she preferred Sylvia Plath to Karl Marx, though she liked the line in the Communist Manifesto about a spectre haunting Europe. I mean, she was whispering now. Usually a ghost just haunts a house or a castle, but Marx's ghost was haunting a whole continent. Maybe the spectre was standing under the Trevi fountain in Rome to cool off from the slog of being a haunter, or buying some bling in the Versace stores in Milan, or watching a Nico concert. Did I know that Nico's real name was Krista? I did not want to know that right now, and that Nico Krista, who was born in Cologne, was haunted all her life by the sound of the bombing in the war. Nor did I want to know, and Jennifer stopped touching me at an erotically fierce moment to reach this thought, that a spectre was inside every photograph she developed in the darkroom. And I did not recall the scene she liked in the film Wings of Desire, which we had recently seen together, where one of the angels says he wants to enter the history of the world. But now, she said, she wanted me to be the spectre inside her. We had quite vigorous sex, and afterwards I really began to ache. It was clear that something was wrong with my hip, which wasn't bruised at all. We laced around and finished the bottle of wine and talked. After a while, Jennifer asked me what I most wanted in life. I would like to see my mother again. It wasn't the sexiest answer, but I knew it would interest Jennifer. Then perhaps you should visit her. You know she's dead. Go to your family house in Bethnal Green and tell me what happens. She had found a stick of charcoal and was balancing a sheet of paper across her naked thighs. I can see cobblestones and a Gothic university, I said. Her hand did not move across the page. I thought you were going to draw. Well, there isn't a Gothic university in Bethnal Green. I'd rather draw your mother than a building. Do you miss her more than your father? It was hard work being tangled up with someone like Jennifer Moreau. We heard the front door slam. That will be Claudia. Jennifer placed my hand in the middle of the sheet of paper and drew around my fingers with the stick of charcoal. Her bedroom was next to the kitchen, and we could hear Claudia filling the kettle. I was lying on my back and could see a bunch of flowering nettles on Jennifer's green Mexican desk in the corner of the room, made from wormwood or something that sounded sinister. also her passport, also a pile of black and white photographs. I wanted to tell Jennifer that I loved her, but I thought it might put her off me. The bedroom door suddenly creaked open. Claudia, who always soaked seaweed overnight, was naked because she was about to step into the sauna, a pink towel wrapped around her head. She was yawning slowly, massively, languorously, as if the whole world bored her shitless, one arm stretched above her head while her left hand rested on her flat, tanned stomach. I asked Jennifer Moreau if she would consider marrying me. In that moment, I felt as if I had just split an atom. She leaned forward and followed my gaze. You know, I think it's over between us, Saul. We should call it a day, but I'll send you the Abbey Road photos anyway. Have a good time in East Berlin. I hope it works out with your visa. She lay back on the pillow next to me and pulled the pilot cap over her face so she did not have to look at me. I stepped out of bed, slightly drunk, and closed the dodgy bedroom door, tripping over the empty bottle of wine we had thrown onto the scratched floorboards. Your white suit is on the chair, she said. Can you get dressed quickly? I have to get into the darkroom at college before they lock it tonight. I had bought the suit at Lawrence Corner, the army surplus store on the Euston Road. It was where the Beatles had found their Sgt. Pepper jackets in the 1960s. I think my white suit used to be a navy uniform, which was just as well because my marriage proposal had sunk to the bottom of the sea. I was shipwrecked amongst the empty oyster shells with their jagged, sharp edges, and I could taste Jennifer Moreau on my fingertips and lips. When I perched next to her on the bed and asked her why she was suddenly so angry with me, she did not seem to know or understand or care. She was calm and rather cold, I thought, as if she had been thinking about this for a while. Well, apart from anything else, you have never once asked me about my art. What do you mean? I was shouting now. There's your art, it's on your walls, there and there. I pointed to two collages taped on the wall of the room. One of them was a blown-up black and white photograph of my face in profile, hung above the bed like a religious icon. She had traced over the outline of my lips in red felt tip and written the words, "Don't kiss me." I look at your art all the time. I was still shouting. I think about it and I think about you. I am interested. Well, seeing as you're so interested, what am I working on now? I don't know. You haven't told me. You haven't asked. So what kind of camera do I use? She knew I had no idea. It was not as if Jennifer had much interest in communist Eastern Europe either. I mean, she hadn't exactly asked me for a reading list, and I didn't hold it against her. Oh yes, I said, you took a negative of me and taped it on your shoulder and lay in the sun, and then you peeled it off and you had a sort of tattoo of me on your skin. She laughed. It's always about you, isn't it? In a way, it was. After all, Jennifer Moreau was always taking photographs of me. When the bedroom door creaked open again, Claudia was eating baked beans from the tin with a giant spoon. Jennifer, I was pleading now, I'm sorry. Since my father died, I've just been trying to get through the day. We could hear the hiss of the kettle boiling on the other side of the door. As it happens, she said, jumping out of bed and slamming the door shut again, a curator from America came to my studio and bought 2 of my photographs. And she has offered me an artist's residency in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, after I graduate. on her desk. "Congratulations," I said miserably. She looked so excited and young and mean. We had been together for just over a year, but I knew I had met my match. For a start, the deal that Jennifer Moreau, French father, English mother, born in Beckenham, South London, had made with me was that she could praise my own sublime beauty, as she put it, in any way she liked, the shape of my body, my intense blue eyes, but I was never to describe her own body or express my admiration for it except with touch. That is how she wanted to know everything I felt and thought about her. Claudia had now switched off the wailing kettle. When I glanced at the wall again, I noticed a photograph of Sanvi taped to the crumbling plaster. The basement flat was damp, and some sort of fungus crept like deranged ants all over the walls of Jennifer's bedroom. In the photograph, Sanvi lay sweating on her side in the sauna. She was reading a book, her left nipple pierced with a small golden hoop. "Get going, Saul. I don't know why you're still hanging around." Jennifer slipped on a kimono with a dragon embroidered on the back and then etched her feet into her favourite sandals, which were made from car tyres. She was practically pushing me out the door. I spent some time fiddling with the latch on the front gate. I never could get in or out of that gate. I had watched Jennifer and Claudia leap over it on days they were late for class. Their other flatmate, Sanvi, had no problem with the latch because she was patient, but Jennifer said that was because she had a degree in advanced mathematics and knew a lot about limitless time. The late afternoon sunshine felt harsh on my eyes, my intense blue eyes. I suddenly turned around because I intuited that Jennifer was watching me, and she was, with a camera in her hand. She was standing by the front door in her dragon kimono and sandals made from car tyres, still flushed from making love with me, her left hand rummaging in her silk pockets, searching for the jelly beans she always kept there. Her camera was pointing at me. As it whirred and clicked, she said quite dramatically, "So long, Saul, you'll always be my muse." For a moment, I thought she was going to throw me a jelly bean in the way that circus trainers throw treats to the performing animals after they have jumped through a flaming hoop. "I'll get the Abbey Road photos to you before you leave. I'm sorry about your father. Hope you feel better soon, and don't forget the tinned pineapple for your translator." Abbey Road was a 12-minute walk from Hamilton Terrace. Something compelled me to return to the site of the near accident. I would have to take it slowly because I noticed I was limping and that my white jacket was torn at the shoulder. Jennifer Moreau was ruthless, and she seemed to know a lot about my life. How did she know that Walter Müller had requested I bring a tin of pineapple with me to the GDR? I couldn't remember if it was because I had told her or she'd asked. It was true that she had accompanied me to my father's funeral 3 weeks ago, so she knew about his death. Her own father had died when she was 12, as had my mother. We often talked about losing a parent at the same age. It was a bond between us, though she thought she was freed by her father's death because he would never have allowed her to go to art school. I'm not sure that I was freed by my mother's death. No, I couldn't see anything good about it, except that I never doubted her love for me, which made her absence even more of a catastrophe. All the same, my father's funeral was a reminder of Jennifer's own early loss, and I had felt protective of her. My callous brother, Matthew, also known as Fat Matt, a full English breakfast 7 days a week, 3 English eggs, 3 English sausages, had arranged the funeral service without consulting me. I had been proud to have glamorous Jennifer Moreau on my arm, what with her exotic French surname, vintage powder blue trouser suit and matching suede platform boots. I had watched Fat Matt and his shabby wife and their 2 young sons sitting in the front pew like they were the royals of the family, and wondered what it was that I had done so wrong in their eyes, apart from wearing a pearl necklace. I was minor family, it seemed, unmarried, no children, relegated to the second row. It was a reminder of the crushing loneliness of my teenage years when Matt, who was not fat yet, and a Bolshevik hero in my father's eyes, started working as an electrician, earning good money while I was trying out the tester eyeliner pencils in the local chemist. By the time I got to Cambridge University, he knew how to rewire a whole house while I was perfecting ways to disguise my ignorance. Intense blue eyes help this endeavour, and make the most of being the raven-haired working-class cat, no claws, high cheekbones amongst the posh pigeons. Matt gave a loving tribute to her father. When it was my turn, all I could say as the most educated person in the family was, "Goodbye, Dad." My brother did agree, though, to my idea of taking a portion of our communist father's ashes with me to be buried in the GDR. After all, he believed in it. I glanced at the tall Edwardian villas that lined either side of Hamilton's terrace as I limped down the long, wide road, still trying to remember how Jennifer knew about the tin of pineapple I had been instructed to purchase by Walter Müller. Had she read his letter to me? Stasi informers were known as ears and eyes, hoch und guck. It would seem that when it came to Jennifer's art, my eyes were closed, my ears were deaf, but actually I was frantically preparing to leave for East Germany, making administrative arrangements to access the archives I would need for my research. The reason I had been given permission to do so was that I had promised to engage sensitively in a paper I would write about the realities of everyday life in the GDR. Instead of the usual Cold War stereotypes, I would focus on education, healthcare and housing for all citizens, all of which I had discussed with my father before he died. If you had ever had to fight a fascist, you would put up a wall to keep them out too. When I reminded him the wall was put up to keep people in, not out, he told me I was the Marie Antoinette of the family and the pearls did not help. Take them off, son. In his view, freedom of speech and movement were not as important as eliminating inequalities and working for the collective good. But then he could catch the ferry to France any time he liked, and no one was going to shoot him from a watchtower in Dover. He turned a blind eye to the Soviet tanks rolling through Prague in 1968 because he obviously thought we were related to Stalin. The Soviet Union is the GDR's godfather. Family must look after each other and protect their kin from reactionary adversaries. Yeah. Like Matt looked after his brother when the boys tried to hang me with my tie from the upper deck of the bus. My father disliked what Jennifer described as my sublime beauty. For some reason, it offended him. To make it worse, I was physically weaker than my brother and sometimes wore an orange silk tie when I kept our father company in the pub. I once heard him order a pint of bitter for himself and a glass of red for the Nancy boy. The barman asked my father if he was okay with Merlot and handed me the pint of bitter. As a compromise, I laid off the mascara when I attended his talks at Communist Party meetings and replaced the orange silk with a green flat cap made from faux snakeskin. Whenever he was in a bad mood, often during my early teens, he would shout to Matt, styling like, "Beat him! Beat him!" And Matt, as his accomplice, would punch me down to the floor. Matt was a serious puncher after our mother died. He once split my lip and gave me 2 intense black eyes, which apparently were more acceptable than my intense blue eyes. It was as if my father's tanks were always parked in the living room of our house in Bethnal Green, ready to roll over my unworthy 13-year-old body with their guns raised. Goodbye, Dad. What else could I say at his funeral? A lot. The difference between my father and myself, apart from my education and high cheekbones, was that I believed that people had to be convinced and not coerced. But now that he was dead and couldn't answer back, I missed his certainty. I was about 7 minutes away from the zebra crossing. Now and then I had to stop to get my breath back. Jennifer's voice kept returning to me. "Can you tell me what actually happened, Saul?" I resolved to make a note about not forgetting the tin of pineapple. I would write it in capital letters and stick it on the fridge with my Zeus, the god of the gods magnet as soon as I arrived home. In return, Walter Müller had written he would give me a jar of pickled cucumber, the emerald of the East, made with fennel and thyme, sugar and vinegar. I wondered if he was aware that the Stasi would be reading his letters. If Stasi informers were known as eyes and ears, it would seem that Jennifer had dumped me because my ears weren't listening and my eyes were closed when it came to her art. And come to think of it, and I did think of it as I picked up speed, I could not recall anything she had told me about her current project, except that I was her muse. Also, I realized that after all the effort to pick up the condoms after the accident, I had not actually used them. They were unopened in the pocket of my torn white jacket. It was strangely comforting to return to the zebra crossing on Abbey Road. There was no traffic, so it was likely that it had been closed after all. It occurred to me that when I had first stepped onto that crossing, I had a girlfriend and I was not limping. What came to mind as I sat on the wall outside the EMI studios was the way in which the man who had nearly run me over had touched my hair, as if he were touching a statue or something without a heartbeat. While I was thinking about this, a woman came up to me waving an unlit cigarette in her hand. She was wearing a blue dress and asked if I had a light. Her short blonde hair was so light it was almost silver. Her eyes were the palest green, like glass washed up on a beach. I reached into my pocket and found the metal Zippo lighter I always carried with me, a windproof, old-fashioned, clunky version of the lighter the American military used in the Second World War, later in Vietnam. She grabbed my hand with a lighter in it and peered at the initials carved into the carriage. I explained that it had belonged to my father in the days he used to smoke when he was having his monthly bath. He had died recently, and I was taking a small portion of his ashes in a matchbox to bury in communist East Berlin. My hands were shaking as I spoke. I asked her to sit with me for a while, and she did, perching on the wall of the EMI studios, our shoulders touching. I could hear her inhaling and exhaling. Smoke was coming out of her nostrils like the dragon embroidered on Jennifer's kimono. She asked if I was a jittery person. Nope. Nervous then? A fragment of a poem I did not know I knew came to mind. I spoke it out loud to the woman smoking her cigarette. We are the dead. Short days ago, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved. She nodded as if I were being normal, which I wasn't. It's by John McRae, I said. He was a Canadian doctor, but he signed up as a gunner in the First World War. I turned my face towards her and she turned towards me while the wind blew a plastic bag from a supermarket around our feet. That's odd, she said, kicking it away. Isn't Walmart American? We kissed on the wall like teenagers, her tongue deep in my mouth, my knee wedged between her thighs. When we finally pulled apart, she asked what kind of perfume I was wearing. Ilang Ilang, I said, as she wrote down her telephone number on the palm of my shaking hand. When she walked away, I read the words on the back of her blue dress. It was a uniform. I realized that she was a nurse and that in the song Penny Lane, there is a nurse who sells poppies from a tray. Those were the first 20 pages or so from The Man Who Knew Everything. The Man Who Saw Everything by Deborah Levy. It's such a beautiful novel. The texture is really beautiful. It's very poetic. There's a lot of playing with time and place here. Art, politics, love, loss. It's very beautiful. I might read a little bit more later on in another video. But if you have read this novel or you would love to read this novel, please join me next Monday, the 19th of July. We're going to have a meeting with a novella reading club and we're going to talk about the beauty of this novel. Thank you very much for listening and see you next time.